Welcome to Surrealism. The seeker stands before an ancient and dangerous paradox. Transformation is promised through the manipulation of base matter. Enlightenment is encoded in cryptic symbols, and a psychological rebirth is disguised as a chemical process. The alchemical tradition is humanity's oldest investigation into the nature of change. But the modern mind confronts a question of life and death. Were the alchemists merely primitive chemists fumbling towards science? Or were they psychological cartographers mapping the territory of inner power? The historical lineage establishes the weight of this question. Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary founder, synthesized ancient wisdom with cold methodology. He established the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. This means the chaos you see in the world is a reflection of the chaos inside your own mind. If you cannot rule your internal kingdom, you will be a slave in the external world. Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of political realism, understood this perfectly. He refused the separation between the ideal and the real. He insisted that to change the world, one must first strip away the polite lies we tell ourselves. Machiavelli was not just a political advisor. He was a depth psychologist of the highest order. He recognized that the true secret of alchemy was never the transmutation of lead into gold. It was the transformation of the fractured unconscious self into an integrated conscious sovereign. The laboratory is not a room filled with glass beakers. The laboratory is your own psyche. The base metals are the raw, undifferentiated contents of your fear and your desire. The philosopher's stone is the self. It is that hypothetical point of total integration where you become untouchable. This is not a metaphor for poetic decoration. This is a manual for epistemic necessity. It is the only language capable of describing the process of becoming a prince. The modern seeker does not confront a relic of pre-scientific thinking. You are confronting a sophisticated phenomenology of transformation. The master formula has existed for millennia, but it requires what Eliphas Levi called the great secret. The recognition that the work is primarily interior. The transformation must occur in your consciousness before it can manifest in your bank account or your relationships. And this work demands a rigor more exacting than any physical discipline. The alchemical system rests upon a triadic foundation. 3 philosophical principles: salt, sulfur, and mercury. Salt represents the body. It is the principle of fixity in material form. It is the container. It is the vessel in which your transformation must occur. Sulfur represents the soul. It is the principle of combustibility and individual identity. It is the fire within the matter. It is the animating principle that gives your character its potency and its drive. Mercury represents the spirit. It is the principle of volatility in communication. It is the messenger between the conscious and the unconscious realms. Machiavelli would view these not as chemical substances, but as categories of power. Salt is your physical presence and your discipline. Sulfur is your ambition and your virtue, your raw, masculine energy. Mercury is your strategic intelligence and your ability to adapt to any situation. These are the 3 pillars of the sovereign. The human being experiences weight, hunger, and fatigue. That is the salt. The human being experiences emotion, desire, and fear. That is the sulfur. And the human being experiences moments of chilling clarity and strategic insight. That is the mercury. To achieve the great work, you must align these 3 forces toward a single objective. The interconnection with the tree of life becomes evident here. The pillar of severity represents structure and limitation, the salt. The pillar of mercy represents force and expansion, the sulfur. The middle pillar represents the balance of the sovereign, the mercury. The mentality required of the adept is ruthless. First, there must be what we call true will, not the petty desires of your ego for a new car or a compliment, but the deep intentionality of your total being aligned toward total sovereignty. This will must be strong enough to sustain the work through periods of doubt. Second, there must be a rigorous ethics of character, not the morality taught in schools to keep you obedient, but the regeneration of character that makes the vessel strong. The transformation cannot proceed if the vessel is leaky. If you are fragmented by contradictory desires, you will shatter under the heat. The alchemist must become, in his own life, a vessel fit to contain the fire. Third, there must be a disposition toward rigorous questioning. Machiavelli distinguished between the vulgar understanding and the philosophical understanding. The vulgar take symbols literally. They seek external miracles. They wait for someone else to save them. The philosophical understanding recognizes that the work is interior. It recognizes that external results are merely symptoms of an internal state. True transformation occurs in the silent halls of your own awareness. This requires the suspension of naive belief. It requires the cultivation of a cold, observing eye. The central doctrine is that transformation follows a lawful pattern. It cannot be forced or rushed. It requires the cooperation of your body, your soul, and your strategic mind. The fire must be kindled. The spirit must be invoked. And the work must be conducted with the hermetic seal. This means secrecy. This means patience. This means meticulous attention to the subtle changes in your environment. The architecture of your new reality is being drawn right now. You are no longer a person. You are a process of refinement. The gold you seek is not in a vault. It is in the will that lights the fire. This is Surrealism. The path to the sovereign starts here. The great work of the sovereign does not begin with creation. It begins with destruction. Machiavelli understood that before a new state can be built, the old foundations must be leveled. He taught that a prince must be willing to destroy the existing order to establish a lasting one. In the psychological laboratory, this first stage is called calcination. In the physical world, calcination involves heating a substance until it is reduced to ash. Everything volatile is burned away. Everything combustible is consumed. Only the fixed, incombustible residue remains. Psychologically, this is the most terrifying moment of your life. This is the moment when your ego's pretension to sovereignty is shattered. The confident self-image you have spent years building must be reduced to ash. The carefully maintained mask you wear for society must melt under the heat. The comfortable narratives you tell yourself about who you are must be exposed as lies. Machiavelli would call this the encounter with the real. It is the moment you realize that the person you believed yourself to be is merely a construction. It is a persona, a social tool mistaken for an essential identity. This process is not theoretical, it is visceral. Calcination manifests as a crisis of meaning. Your previous coping mechanisms fail. The belief systems that once provided certainty begin to crumble. You realize that your NI-ness was actually a form of cowardice. You realize that your morality was just a fear of consequence. The heat of calcination comes from the friction between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. Relationships fail during this stage because they were built on the old false self. Career paths reveal themselves as wrong turns taken to please others. This is the fire that clears the field. It is a necessary destruction. Without the ash of the old self, the gold of the sovereign cannot be born. Once the fire has done its work, the next operation begins: dissolution. In the laboratory, the ash is dissolved in the universal solvent, water. What was solid becomes fluid. What was definite becomes ambiguous. Psychologically, this is the flooding of your consciousness with the contents of the hidden mind. The boundaries that kept your civilized self separate from your shadow self begin to dissolve. Emotions you have suppressed for decades surge upward. Memories you safely compartmentalize demand your attention. The danger of this stage is real. Without a stable container, what we call the salt of discipline, dissolution becomes fragmentation. You risk losing the ground of rational identity. Machiavelli warned that a leader who loses his footing in a crisis is doomed. You must develop the strength to witness your own liquefaction without drowning. You are facing the objective psyche, the accumulated raw energy of human nature. This is the stage of the work where most people flee back to their old delusions. They cannot handle the ambiguity. They cannot handle the feeling of being adrift in a sea of chaotic content. But the sovereign knows that you must be liquid before you can be recast. You must be willing to lose your shape to find your true form. Machiavelli noted that the prince who adapts his spirit to the times will prosper. Dissolution is the process of becoming adaptable. It is the removal of the rigid, brittle structures of the ego. By the end of this operation, you are no longer a thing with a fixed name. You are a process with infinite potential. You are the ash and the water. You are the heat and the flood. In the next section, we will learn the third operation, separation. We will learn how to sort through the debris of the dissolved self. We will learn how to distinguish between what is yours and what was programmed into you. We will begin the work of the fox, discriminating between the truth and the trap. The fire has burned, the water has flowed. Now the sovereign begins to choose. This is surrealism. The reconstruction of the self has begun. The fire has reduced you to ash. The water has turned that ash into a fluid mass. You are now in a state of total potential but also total chaos. To move from chaos to sovereignty, you must execute the third operation, separation. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must possess the mind of a fox to recognize the snares hidden in the grass. In the psychological laboratory, separation is the act of discriminating between the essential and the parasitic. It is the discriminating function of the cold, objective mind. From the dissolved mass of your psyche, elements must be sorted, evaluated, and judged. You must ask, what in here is actually mine? And what is foreign matter that was forced into me? Most of what you call your personality is actually a collection of introjected values. They are the cultural scripts you were handed as a child. They are the parental expectations you mistook for your own ambition. They are the social shaming mechanisms that taught you to fear your own power. Separation is the stage of psychological analysis. It is the surgical removal of the nice person narrative, that has been used to keep you obedient. You must discriminate between your authentic will and your conditioned impulses. Machiavelli taught that to lead, one must understand the difference between how people live and how they ought to live. He refused to be blinded by the ideal. You must do the same with your own internal landscape. You must confront what we call the shadow. The shadow is the accumulation of every trait you have denied, suppressed, and rejected. In the stage of separation, the shadow is brought under the light of the microscope. You will find aggressive potentials that were denied because they didn't fit the image of a good citizen. You will find creative energies that were repressed because they were too loud or too much. You will find raw, masculine drives that were shamed into silence by a world that fears the sovereign. The fox does not judge the shadow as evil. The fox judges the shadow based on its utility. Some shadow material reveals itself as toxic, compulsions and hatreds that serve only to destroy you. These must be filtered out and discarded, but other shadow material is actually your gold in disguise. It is the raw fuel you need to claim your throne. Separation requires what we call double consciousness. You must develop the capacity to simultaneously experience your emotions and witness them. You are the patient on the table, and you are the surgeon holding the blade. This operation requires a ruthlessness that most people cannot stomach. They want to believe that everything inside them is good. But the alchemist knows that the soul is a mixture of lead and light. Machiavelli noted that he who wishes to be entirely good among so many who are not will eventually meet his ruin. In your internal work, this means that if you refuse to integrate your capacity for darkness, you will remain a victim of it. By separating the lion from the sheep inside you, you prepare for the next stage. You are purifying your intentions. You are hardening your resolve. You are recognizing that virtue, the core of Machiavellian strength, comes from the integration of the total self. This is the end of the vulgar understanding. The vulgar seek miracles from the outside. The philosophical sovereign knows that miracles are manufactured through the internal separation of truth from lies. The fog is lifting. The elements are being sorted. The architecture of the sovereign is becoming visible. In the next section, we will explore the chemical marriage, the union of the opposites, the moment where the purified fox and the awakened lion become one. This is surrealism. The blade is sharp. The work continues. The elements have been sorted. The surgeon's work is done. The fox has identified the traps, and the lion has found his claws. Now, the sovereign must execute the fourth operation, conjunction. In the ancient texts, this is described as the alchemical marriage. It is the union of the sun and the moon, the red king and the white queen. Psychologically, this is the merging of the purified opposites within your own psyche. Machiavelli understood that a leader is not a static figure. He wrote that a prince must know how to use both the nature of the beast and the nature of the man. He must be able to switch between the lion and the fox in a single heartbeat. Conjunction is the moment where this fluidity is born. It is the reconciliation of your conscious will and your unconscious power. Up until now, you have been at war with yourself. Your good self was constantly fighting your shadow. Your logic was constantly at war with your intuition. This internal conflict is why you have been easy to manipulate. A house divided against itself cannot stand. A psyche divided against itself cannot lead. In conjunction, you stop viewing your darkness as an enemy to be conquered. You start viewing it as an ally to be integrated. You recognize that you can be both compassionate and cold, both vulnerable and invincible, both rational and intuitive. The unintegrated ego demands consistency and simple labels. It wants to be the nice guy or the success, but the sovereign understands that true power is paradoxical. Machiavelli's philosophy is often called realpolitik because it embraces the paradox of survival. He knew that to preserve the state, a prince must sometimes act against his own word. He must be able to use necessary evil to achieve a greater good. In your life, conjunction means you no longer feel guilty for being strong. You no longer feel bad for setting a boundary that has teeth. You have married your morality to your utility. This is not a comfortable stage. The ego resists paradox because paradox threatens the ego's illusion of control. The ego wants either or. The sovereign demands both and. You are building the middle pillar of consciousness. This is where the internal Mercury becomes stable. The messenger between the worlds is no longer a chaotic force, it is a loyal servant. You are beginning to experience synergy, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Your insights become sharper, your actions become more decisive. You stop trying to be powerful and start being power. The alchemical marriage is not a wedding of peace, it is a wedding of purpose. It is the alignment of every cell of your being toward a single sovereign goal. Machiavelli noted that a prince who is well integrated is almost impossible to deceive. Why? Because he has already encountered every liar and every cheat within his own soul. He knows the traps because he has say, end them in himself. He knows the wolf because he has integrated the wolf. The external world can no longer shock you. The poison of the toxic person can no longer infect you. You have already swallowed the snake and made it part of your strength. You are now entering the territory of the master, but the work is not over. To make this union permanent, the substance must be transformed again. It must be fermented. It must be brought to a higher frequency of existence. The king and queen have met. Now they must rule. In the next section, we will discuss the fermentation of the will. We will learn how to activate the objective psyche to work for you. We will learn why the most powerful move is often the one you do not make. This is Surrealism. The two have become one. The great work accelerates. We have achieved the union of opposites. The king and queen are married within the crucible of your soul. But a marriage is only the beginning of a dynasty. To make your sovereignty permanent, the integrated self must undergo the fifth operation, fermentation. In the physical laboratory, fermentation is a process of organic transformation. It is the stage where the substance is allowed to rot so that it may be reborn. It is the action of a hidden catalyst, the ferment or the leaven, that initiates a change of a completely different order. Machiavelli understood that there are forces in history that transcend the individual. He spoke of fortuna, the unpredictable, chaotic flow of events that can ruin the strongest of men. He argued that the prince must not only be strong and clever, but he must be in sync with the spirit of the times. Fermentation is the psychological equivalent of aligning oneself with the deeper currents of reality. Up to this point, you have been the one conducting the work. You have been analyzing, discriminating, and oozing. But fermentation introduces a transformation that your ego cannot direct or control. Something larger takes over. In psychology, this corresponds to the activation of what we call the objective psyche. These are the levels of the mind that are not personal. They are the ancient, archetypal patterns shared by all of humanity. They contain the accumulated wisdom of the species. When you enter the stage of fermentation, you stop fighting the world and start moving with it. You begin to experience spontaneous insights. You notice synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem too precise to be mere chance. You feel as though you are being guided by an intelligence that transcends your conscious thoughts. Machiavelli would call this the moment of opportunity. It is the point where the prince's virtue meets fortuna. Most people miss this moment because they are too busy trying to force their will onto the world. The sovereign, however, has learned the art of strategic waiting. Fermentation cannot be rushed. It requires the withdrawal of the ego from the noise of the external world. It requires silence. It requires the creation of a hermetic seal around your inner life. During this stage, your old desires continue to die away. The petty need for revenge against those who hurt you begins to feel irrelevant. The craving for social status starts to taste like ash. You are being leavened by a higher purpose. This is the birth of what Machiavelli called the new prince. He is not a man seeking power for his own vanity. He is a man who has become a vessel for power itself. He understands that true dominance does not come from screaming or hitting. It comes from the quiet, unstoppable momentum of a soul that is in alignment with reality. The psychology of fermentation involves the death of the I, the small, frantic I that is always worried about what others think. In its place, a larger sense of self begins to emerge, a self that is rooted in the mercury of the spirit. You are no longer reacting to the toxic people in your life. You are observing them as part of a larger ecosystem. You see their patterns, their fears, and their doomed trajectories. You no longer feel the need to argue with them. You simply allow them to ferment in their own toxicity until they collapse. This is a level of detachment that feels like ice to the uninitiated, but to the sovereign, it is the highest form of peace. Machiavelli wrote, "Therefore, a prince who wishes to maintain himself must learn how to be not good and to use this knowledge and not use it, according to the necessity of the case." In fermentation, you learn that not being good is not about cruelty. It is about the surgical removal of sentimentality. It is about seeing the world with the cold clarity of the sun. You are preparing for the final refinements. The base matter of your old life is being transformed into a spiritual gold, but before the gold can be fixed, it must be distilled. It must be purified through the fire one last time. The spirit must be separated from the dross through the power of repeated focus. You are no longer a victim. You are no longer a student. You are becoming the catalyst. This is surrealism. The deep mind is waking up. The sovereign is almost here. The fermentation is complete. The substance of your life has been broken down and reborn in the darkness. But the work is not yet stable. The spirit is now present, but it is still mixed with the vapors of the old self. To fix the sovereign power into your very bones, you must undergo the sixth operation, distillation. In the laboratory, distillation is the process of heating a liquid until it vaporizes, then cooling it back into a liquid state. This cycle is repeated hundreds, even thousands of times. Each cycle removes a layer of impurity. Each cycle makes the essence more concentrated, more potent, and more pure. Psychologically, this is the practice of recollection. It is the cultivation of a focus so sharp that nothing can distract it. Machiavelli understood that the greatest threat to a prince is not an external army, but the internal wandering of his own mind. He wrote, "A prince ought to have no other aim or thought, nor select anything else for his study than war and its rules and discipline." In the alchemy of the soul, war is the constant struggle to remain conscious in a world designed to keep you asleep. Distillation is the repetition of your new habits until they become your nature. It is the act of returning your attention to your center every time a toxic person tries to pull you away. Every time they bait you and you choose silence, you are distilling your power. Every time they lie and you choose to stay in reality, you are distilling your truth. This process is exhausting. It is the repetitive work of the spiritual athlete. Most people fail here because they want a miracle that happens overnight. They want the gold without the labor. But the sovereign knows that true authority is built in the mundane repetitions. In the clinical world, this is called neural plasticity. You are literally rewiring your brain to bypass the old victim pathways and strengthen the new sovereign circuits. You are distilling your nervous system. The heat of life, the stress, the conflict, the challenges acts as the furnace. Instead of letting that heat destroy you, you use it to vaporize your weaknesses. You let the fear rise up, you observe it, and you let it condense back into cold, hard resolve. Machiavelli advised that a prince should read history and reflect the actions of great men. This reflection is a form of distillation. You are taking the raw data of human experience and boiling it down to its essential principles of power. You are removing the sugarcoating of society. You are removing the polite lies of your upbringing. What remains is the quintessence, the fifth essence, the part of you that cannot be burned, cannot be drowned, and cannot be manipulated. This is the birth of the clinical eye. You begin to see people as they are, not as you want them to be. You see the toxic person not as a monster, but as a predictable set of chemical reactions. You see their attacks as volatile vapors that have no power to touch your fixed center. The distillation process produces a clarity that borders on the supernatural. You can walk into a room and instantly feel the power dynamics. You can hear the hidden intent behind a person's words. You can see the trap before it is even set. This is not magic. It is the result of thousands of cycles of observation and refinement. You are no longer trying to be smart. You are simply seeing the truth because you have removed the layers of self-deception. Machiavelli said, "There is no other way to guard yourself against flattery than by making men understand that telling you the truth will not offend you. In your internal work, this means telling the truth to yourself until it no longer hurts. When you can look at your own mistakes and your own darkness without flinching, you have achieved the first stage of the quintessence. You are now ready for the final step. The vapors are gone, the liquid is clear as diamond, the spirit is ready to be made flesh. In the next and final section, we will witness the coagulation, the birth of the philosopher's stone, the moment where you become the sovereign in the eyes of the world. This is surrealism. The phi. Re is at its peak. The work is almost finished. The vapors have settled. The heat of the furnace has done its final work. What was volatile has been made fixed. What was spiritual has been made material. We reach the final operation of the great work, coagulation. In the ancient laboratory, this is the production of the philosopher's stone, the lapis, the red gold. It is the point where the purified spirit and the refined body are fused into a single, indestructible form. Psychologically, this is the birth of the individuated personality. You are no longer a collection of fragments. You are no longer a nice person struggling against a hidden shadow. You have become a unified field of consciousness. Machiavelli wrote about the prince who finally achieves a state of stable rule. He noted that it is not enough to gain power. One must have the internal structure to keep it. Coagulation is that internal structure. It is the establishment of a center that does not depend on external validation. The person who has reached this stage manifests qualities that are immediately recognizable, yet impossible to imitate. The first quality is presence. You inhabit the now with the totality of your being. You no longer leak energy into the past through regret. You no longer leak energy into the future through anxiety. You are simply here. This presence arises because the internal war has ended. When your conscious will and your unconscious power are no longer at odds, your attention becomes a laser. Toxic people are terrified of this presence. They rely on your fragmentation to find an entry point. But when they look at you now, they see a solid wall. They see a being that cannot be baited because there is nothing dangling for them to catch. The second quality is ethical clarity. This is not the morality of rules and social pressure. It is a morality that emerges from direct perception. Machiavelli said that the prince must act according to the necessity of the case. When you are coagulated, you act from wholeness. You make difficult decisions without paralysis. You set boundaries without the need for an apology. You accept the consequences of your actions without the need to blame others. You have achieved what the alchemists called the diamond body. You are transparent, yet you are the hardest substance in the room. The third quality is creative sovereignty. You no longer mechanically repeat the patterns of your upbringing. You respond to every situation freshly, with the full resources of your integrated mind. You have access to the objective psyche, the source of all genuine innovation. Life ceases to be a series of reactions and becomes a series of actions. You are no longer a leaf in the wind. You are the wind. Machiavelli taught that the new prince is he who founds a new order. By coagulating your identity, you have founded a new order within yourself. You are the king, the fox, and the lion, all occupying the same throne. But sovereignty brings a final heavy responsibility. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this privilege comes with a cost. You can no longer participate in the collective delusions of the crowd. You will see through the lies of mass media. You will see through the manipulations of social circles. You will stand apart. The air at the summit of the mountain is thin. It can be lonely, but the view is absolute. You are now awake, and you can never go back to sleep. The gold of the alchemist was never about wealth. It was about freedom. The freedom to not be a victim. The freedom to not be a slave to your own neuroses. The freedom to look at the architects of chaos and smile because their games no longer out you. You have completed the magnum opus. You have transmuted the lead of your trauma into the gold of your character. Machiavelli famously wrote that fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her. In the language of the sovereign, this means that reality responds to force of character. If you are weak and fragmented, reality will trample you. If you are coagulated and unified, reality will move for you. The work remains what it has always been. Not the change of metals in a jar, but the refinement of awareness in the furnace of life. The gold is not in the crucible. The gold is the will that lit the fire. The gold is you. Welcome to the end of the illusion. Welcome to the beginning of your rule. This is Surrealism. The sovereign has arrived.